बहुत ज़बरदस्त सोचा हुआ आपसे बातचीत करूं क्योंकि मैं लंबे अरसे से सिनेमा देखती हूँ। 4 साल की उम्र से मैंने सिनेमा देखना शुरू किया और मेरा एक रिश्ता है सिनेमा के साथ विच इज एंटायरली नॉन एनालिटिकल। मतलब वन वॉचेस फिल्म्स बिकॉज इट हैज मेनी अदर characteristics to it, and over a period of time you might develop a critical analysis of films, but essentially starting off from pre-independence time, it has had its ideological context and framing, but it also has entertained, and so you all know that at the end of the day you don't go to see a film for what it's trying to tell you from the point of view of either expanding humanity or analysis on the caste question or whatever it is. Essentially, people go to see films simply from the point of view of being entertained, and in the process, कुछ चीजें उसमें वो डाल दिए जाते हैं of which are of course ideology is very much present, but it's also in the framing of the entertainment itself. Issues might be raised which speak to you from the point of view of the questions of your critical questions of your time. So वो चीज़ है। तो हमें जब सिनेमा देखने जाते हैं, आजकल तो शायद लोग जाते भी नहीं हैं, basically people are watching things on their television or on their computers. So in fact the big screen has completely disappeared as far as I can make out. So in one sense I think what I'm going to say to you will just be a little account of the way in which cinema has been used by people to send a message in some way or the other. And my focus will then be very briefly on the documentary cinema that has been created, and for which I think it's a crisis moment as far as I can make out, because there are not even any spaces any longer available for screening documentary cinema. So let's just begin. आपका जनरेशन जो है वो ऑलरेडी पोस्ट neoliberal generation है, so your relationship with the arts, creative writing, some of you perhaps still read literature, and because of the fact that you come from multiple social locations, तो आपके लिए शायद ये लिटरेचर अभी भी कायम है। सिनेमा हमेशा ही था और देखते रहे हैं, बट उसको we have never treated it as part of the analysis and the kind of ideology that it is trying to that it is putting into you, regardless of whether you receive it precisely in that way or not. So to some extent, and I think Professor Wankhade will give you a more sustained analysis, because I think he has a better focus than I have. I have a somewhat generalized response to filmmaking. Let's begin to some extent with the in my generation, we actually learned, and some of us who were from urban locations, जैसे मैं पैदा हुई थी दिल्ली में, यहीं पे पली बड़ी हूँ, तो थोड़ा बात मैंने जो देखा था, my understanding of India was restricted to urban India. I had no idea about rural India. In fact, it's my students and my partner's fieldwork that introduced me to rural India in a sustained way. For me, actually, the manner in which social contradictions were played out and exist in parts of the country, I was exposed to it through cinema. It's the cinema that progressive cinema, quote unquote, which actually is a reflection of progressive literature. Progressive literature has had a tremendous impact, but I'm not going into that at the moment. But so, for instance, for me, दो बीघा जमीन वाज एन आई ओपनर। आप लोग शायद पता नहीं कितने लोगों ने इसको देखा होगा, बट अगर देखा है तो शायद रिलेट भी नहीं कर पाएंगे आप उसको, क्योंकि इट्स अ ओल्ड स्टाइल फिल्म जो लेट 50s की बनी हुई फिल्म है, इफ आई एम नॉट मिस्टेकन, जिसमें कहानी, but if you look at it as social history, it becomes very interesting. And some of you are history students, you can actually see the social relations and the understanding that people had of social relations coming out in cinema. So Dobi Ka Zameen is a, अगर आप उसकी निचोड़ निकालें, it was a film that spoke about the exploitation of the zamindar and the zamindars, or the let's say quote unquote ruling classes, and the manner in which a man hangs on to his piece of zameen. So it is actually the relationship between a peasant, a producing peasant, a man who is autonomous, whose relationship with the land is critical to his own sense of self. He can't imagine himself in any other. Shambhu lives the life of a man. उसकी setting भी बहुत मजेदार बनाते हैं. If you deconstruct करो उस फिल्म को, तो आप देखेंगे कि उसमें the first sequence is actually around the lack of rain, and then the rain comes. So then there is a first moment of joy जो उसको पूरी तरह से कॉपी किया है लगान ने. लगान बांधता नहीं है, लेकिन लगान ने पूरी तरह से दो बीघा जमीन को बेस रख करके अपनी फिल्म बनाई है. Because अब you are speaking in a different kind of way, so you won't depict social relations. You must remember, दो बीघा जमीन was made by Bimal Roy. Bimal Roy had made progressive cinema in Bengal before he came. So उसकी सिनेमा जो है उसमें एक वो चीज है जो is still a survival from the Bengal of the famine, the Bengal of deep social concern, and the early left movements, इप्टा वगैरह का उसका झलक उसमें पूरी तरह से दिखता है in the making of that film. And the framing of the film is this man is trying to hang on to his piece of land. फिर वो जमींदार is of course debt, which is a crisis. और हम बोल रहे हैं यहाँ पर आज बड़ी थ्योरी मारी जा रही थी, बट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे जो बेचारा लेबरर है या जो छोटा किसान है, वो किस तरह से डेट में जकड़ा हुआ है, जिसकी वजह से उसकी कितनी ऑटोनॉमी खत्म हो जाती है. आई मीन द मैन हैज नो रिलेशन, ही इज नॉट एन ऑटोनॉमस इकोनॉमिक बीइंग, ही इज नॉट एन ऑटोनॉमस एनीथिंग, तो वो बंदा जो है, how he tries to save his land and then goes to the city, and then वो सारा जो है cinematically it's very powerful because उसमें those sequences when the man has to leave his village, leaving the village itself is a big it's a big wrench from the point of view of a man, and then the city is poised as the exploitative place, but वहाँ पर भी कुछ लोग अच्छे मिल जाएंगे आपको, and then of course the manner in which it's a losing battle. So if you look at a history as an unfolding and a concern with different social and economic moments, then Gobi Gazamini forms one very important chapter in that account. So you could actually see it like that. Some years later you might find, say, someone like Shyam Benegal. Shyam Benegal also made progressive cinema. He also made Anchalik सिनेमा, मतलब वो प्रदेश को लेकर के और भाषा को लेकर के काफी इंटरेस्टिंग उनकी कॉम्बिनेशन बनती है. पर आप उसको उसमें देखेंगे कि देयर इज वन फिल्म आई डोंट थिंक मोस्ट पीपल हैव पेड एनी अटेंशन टू, एंड दैट इज कॉल्ड सुस्मन. सुस्मन इज एन अकाउंट ऑफ अ वीवर, द ऑटोनमस प्रोड्यूसर ऑफ he has everything. He has his loom, he has his own hands for labor, he has creativity. He doesn't have capital, so he can't buy the silk with which he lives. Achha, it's set in a very interesting way because this is all the post Festival of India type of moment, जिसमें फिर एक साड़ी बनाई जा रही है जो एग्जिबिट होगी, in France because वहाँ पे cultural festival हो रही है, India festival होने वाली है. Now the film is very interesting because it has a complete account of the move from all the different categories of people, social categories of people who work on the in the artisanal industry, the silk industry, is brought out. So here is the master weaver, who has a great sense of dignity because he is a creative person. But all around him he's fixed with certain limitations. So the capital is, he's given the thread. The thread is given to him by somebody who is the local intermediary, and who's of course linked to the market in a way that this man is not. So वो the condition ये है उसके ऊपर कि तुम साड़ी बनाओगे, and there's a woman who's going to take this sari to the Festival of India in France, and this is Neena Gupta in the film. So here she is Om Puri is the weaver, master weaver. So here she is, and the condition is कि वो एक ही साड़ी बनाएगा ऐसा. He cannot make more than one sari because it has to be unique in order to be exhibited in France. अच्छा, his wife is desperate कि दूसरी साड़ी बनाई जाए, उसकी बेटी की शादी के लिए वो उसको रखना चाहते हैं. This is not allowed. So secretly it is being made. दूसरी साड़ी बनाई जा रही है, and then there's the drama unfolds कि वो पकड़ा जाता है. He feels violated because he's a very dignified. He's actually almost maniacal in the sense of I am an honest person and I have never made any compromises and so on. So the film unfolds. Now, actually, it's a very interesting film from the point of view of कौन किसके पास अपने औजार हैं, and you could entirely see the move from craft production to capitalist modes of production in the film, because various categories of people are brought in there. उसमें बीच में ये भी है कि वो उनके बच्चे चले जाते हैं शहर में काम करने के लिए, वहाँ फिर दंगा हो जाता है, they have to come back. So actually the relationship of the autonomous self-creative person within a larger social context is brought out in this film. So, we can actually use the cinema very effectively from the point of view of teaching a history class, because it speaks to you in a very interesting kind of way. अब ये तो सिनेमा था, चलो अब ये प्रोग्रेसिव सिनेमा हमेशा. आज के तहत what will you see? What are you seeing happening? And I'm not going to go into great detail about it because I want to move to documentary cinema. What's very interesting is even the so-called progressive quote unquote आज के तहत, you know कि अभी recently हमारे यहाँ the theatre is completely shut down. Nobody is going to cinema. 100 crores, 1,000 crores, and whatever crores is now the marker of a successful film. So you can't actually think in small numbers any longer. And so there's Shah Rukh Khan, targeted by the system, amazingly, who comes up with these 3 films. The first of them, you're all familiar with the fact. Pathan brought the characters into cinema. If you look at Pathan, it's a crazy film. Huh? I mean, in terms of its rationale, उसकी कोई तुक नहीं बनता है, because उसमें germs भी हैं, but nation is terribly strong. और तो भारत माता का एक बच्चा, हालांकि उसके बीच में you can लगाओ your own angle, which is to say वो बंदा कौन है, मतलब उसकी कोई आइडेंटिटी नहीं है, क्योंकि he was found in a cinema hall. He's a foundling. Nobody knows who he is. But then he claims to be, then he is the Indian. He's the great Indian who's going to save the whole world, because the wicked forces are doing whatever. Now this mad film brought not only everybody back into the theatre, but we were all rooting. जब वो उसका एक लाइन आता था, बकवास था, hanging in the air, fighting, पता नहीं कहाँ लटक रहे हैं, क्या कर रहे हैं, लड़ रहे हो, but एक वो line आ जाता था, which is to say, which would be the line that we would all respond to, because, and that's why the crowds were rooting. They were clapping and screaming and whatever it is. And it was interestingly an older secular nationalist crowd in that sense of the term, because speaking against the kind of control that has been put in our, as far as our ideology is concerned. Jawan goes a step further. I haven't seen it, but Jawan goes a step further because it's got every single fault line. So every single movement is there. Farmers movement is there. This one is there. That one is there. सब कुछ है. And it's still getting the 1,000 crores or 1,500 crores or whatever it is. But interestingly, the line that they are catches everybody's imagination is कि बेटे से पहुंचने के पहले बाप से निपट ले. Okay, and what is this? This is Shah Rukh Khan speaking back to तू क्या कर लेगा मेरा? मैं तो असली nationalist हूँ. The real nationalist. I may be a Muslim, but what the hell? To speak back like that to a time like this is quite an interesting moment. मतलब हमारे लिए तो फिर वो थोड़ी छोटी चीजें बच जाती है ना कि जिसमें हम रिलेट कर दें कि अच्छा ये है. Now चलो वो भी है. And of course, you know, he does donkey, which is labor is flying from them. So काम नहीं है, नौकरी नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है, तुम बाहर से जा रहे हो. बट भारत माता इज देयर इन दिल एंड हमेशा, और उसी पर वापस हम आएंगे. एंड दैट इज दैट भारत माता जो अभी तुम पूरी तरह से नहीं हमारे लिए, हमको वहां से तुम उजाड़ नहीं सकते हो. सो दैट्स द ट्रैजेक्टरी ऑफ गोइंग फ्रॉम द प्रोग्रेसिव टू इन अ सेंस. बट व्हेन यू कंसिडर what is the contrast with, if it's animal, then what are you going to do with it, at the end of the day? I haven't seen it, but I'm afraid मैं डरपोक हूँ, गंदी चीज में देखना चाहती हूँ. सच्ची बात है कि I can't handle it anymore. बुढ़ी हो गई हूँ. मेरा लाइन आजकल के मैं पैदा हुई थी at the point where देश अभी आजाद होने वाला था और हम सब we had this dream of India, of what we were going to be. And so I often say I was born at the moment of hope and die in the time of despair. अब मैं मर जाऊंगी इसी जमाने में, and I will have nothing to speak. मैं दुखी मर जाऊंगी. But what can I do? उस बीच में हम क्या कर सकते हैं? जो करना है वो करते रहेंगे. ये एंगल है. So in that situation, this kind of cinema has had its whatever it is. It's had its impact, and then it's impossible. I mean, I don't know if you people have seen Animal, but I'm scared of seeing it because it seems to me that I won't be able to handle that level of violence, and if there's a lot of gender-based violence also, it is not something that I could handle. Let's move to documentary cinema. I took early retirement from my college. I'm very personal in my whatever I'm saying to you, but doesn't matter. मतलब ये tolerance तुमको देनी पड़ेगी of someone who is my generation. So I took early retirement in order that बहुत पढ़ाया जाता था. 18 क्लास हमारी होती थी, मर जाती थी मैं पढ़ाते. तो I said early retirement ले लेती हूँ, पेंशन तो मिलेगा. So I left. उन जमाने में पेंशन मिलता था, अब पेंशन भी नहीं है मेरी जान, अब कुछ नहीं है. पता नहीं आपको पेंशन मिला इतनी मिलेगा ना? नहीं मिलेगा. So I decided that I will take off. I will go to demonstrations, I will do the work that I want to do, मैं civil rights का काम करती हूँ, ये सब. So I took early retirement. But for some quirky reason, which is related to history, by the way, but I never stopped being a historian in that sense at all. I would have worked on Buddhism on the one hand, on Pandit Ramabai on the other. But the point is, a sustained interest in history here. And so I I stumbled upon an unexpected archive. I had already begun to work on women during that period. I mean, I've written a lot on women, and I've written a fair amount on caste also. But the continuing interest on women, and I have focused on women wherever I've written in the last, I think post the Ramabai book, I have actually put gender fairly strongly on the map. So I decided to So it's very difficult to write women's histories. It's very difficult, as it's very difficult to write Dalit histories. It's very difficult to write the histories of the margins, because the archive does not represent them. The archive is framed in a very narrow, restricted way, and it goes back to the whole. I remember when I was a young teacher, we used to have an essay paper. The essay paper was you had to write only one answer in 3 hours. That was quite fantastic, because आप पूरा एक thesis, छोटा सा thesis लिख सकते थे. उसमें topics मिलते थे, and you could imagine things. There was a topic which said history is the biography of great men. Admittedly, it is the biography of great men. उसमें ना little men आएंगे, उसमें ना औरतें आएंगी. Margins तो उसमें आ ही नहीं सकते हैं. That framework of history is something that we've all generated, and the archive has been a representation of that mode of thinking. Because the archive में क्या चीज पहुंचती है? अब आप अशोका के पास भी चल जाओ, as far back as Ashoka. अब वो बंदा जो है, you can imagine, he's leaving the first set of texts from a state, from a king, okay? And Patrick Oliver has written this book which is on, he's treated it as a literary text, and from that he's drawn his understanding of Ashoka. Now, imagine that situation. वो सारा जो sandstone है, it is quarried, wherever it was placed, the pillar, that sandstone was quarried from Chunar in Uttar Pradesh. उसको 13th century में लोग फिरोज शाह के जमाने में जब वो 2 pillars को लेकर आए थे छोटे जगह से to put in Delhi, there is a description of a complex operation to bring that. सारे पिलर्स को आपने क्वारी किए, इंस्क्राइब किए और भेजे बाहर लिख चढ़ाने के लिए. Who can do it except the king, the man who has resources? आम आदमी तो क्या करेगा? आम आदमी तो जाता है बेचारा, पत्थर देखता है, जिसके ऊपर लिखता है, एंड उसका फॉर्मेट भी बन गया है. एंड वो फॉर्मेट क्या बनाएंगे? sort of नीलम एंड संजय वर हियर, डील बनाया, उसमें चीर मार दी. That's how he gets into history. Oh, he thinks he's getting into history. So anyway, you look at so the archive is a reflection of state power. The archive is a reflection of the great in that society. अब वो जो कह रहा है, that goes into the archive. तुम और हम जो सोच रहे हैं, हम तो रह गए बाहर, है ना? Nobody is going to pay. Now, for that situation, when I came across this little, so it's very difficult to write history of underclass, deprived castes and women, because the archive does not contain their documents. इक्का दुक्का आ गया. Of course, Manoj Gupta has been quite fantastic. अभी उसने पूरा किताब लिखा है based on the archive from colonial times. ये भी बात मजेदार है. But the archive has spoken, and it's spoken from the case file. It's actually the case law that has spoken, and it's a fantastic book. You people should read it, because it's an account of the way the state, starting off from कि ब्राह्मण को तुम capital punishment नहीं दे सकते हो. Okay? In the first documents are saying Banaras Brahmins have an exemption from the death penalty, which goes back to our ancient texts. कि ब्राह्मण को तुम डेथ पेनल्टी नहीं दे सकते हो. इक्वली दलितों को आप क्या करोगे? स्टॉक्स में रखोगे. दैट इज दे आर द पीपल हु आर चेन्ड, put with the blocks of wood and so on. So from that account he goes into बहुत डिटेल उनका एनालिसिस है. तुम्हारी हमारी सबकी इतिहास उसमें आ जाएगी. I was very struck by the fact that there's a description of the claim to take the temple car through the cities, through the town's streets. And upper castes are claiming that the Dalits cannot come, Yuras. And then Yuras are not even properly Dalits. They are sort of lower OBCs. उनको भी आने नहीं देते हैं सड़क पे. And the debate is कि सड़क किसकी है? अगर सरकार ने बनाई है, then it's made from the resources of the country. So therefore, you cannot claim the exemption which earlier people had. So debate उस पर चल रहा है कि आप उसमें शामिल हो सकते हो कि नहीं हो सकते हो, जा सकते हो कि. So you'll find everyone's histories. और हमारे पूर्वज की हिस्ट्री उसमें आ जाएगी, क्योंकि किसी न किसी तरह से वो कास्ट रिफ्रैक्टेड जो हिस्ट्री हमारी है वो उस किताब में कैप्चर्ड है. So that's very important. Anyway, तो ये सब है. Now how this complex reality is very difficult to actually frame and show in cinema. Cinema can't वो stereotype ही करेगा थोड़ा सा. You know, it will give you the punchline, आप ताली बजाएंगे at given moment, but there will be hardly any analysis that you can put in cinema. Documentary cinema is a consequence, and I have to return to. So I began to make documentaries because I suddenly came upon an archive, an unexpected archive, from a woman who learned how to read for herself, and then she kept a lot of paper in her trunk. और वो बुद्धि जो थी वो गुजर गई without, I mean, it was regarded as थोड़ी सी पागल सी मानी गई थी. But what was interesting is that उसके पास उसके trunk में she had even receipts of the books that she bought. She was self-taught, and then she began to buy books and read voraciously. तो उसमें there is a receipt for first edition of Red Star over China. Edward Snow's kitab. She's kept that receipt. There's correspondence with Rabindranath Tagore for books that she's getting from Shantiniketan. उसकी receipt भी रखी हुई. So बड़ा unusual archive था, and उसको देख करके I began to get fascinated by that history, because even within that socially refracted history of ours, there was some paper, some stuff that this woman had collected, and it was placed over there, and it was very unusual because it was not शादी का जोड़ा, which is what we think कि औरतें रखती हैं, तो अपनी शादी का जोड़ा रखती हैं. Sorry, नहीं रखती हैं, because most of the time शादी is useless. तो क्यों रखोगे उसमें? So you know, so what is this strange archive? And I got very fascinated. I made this one film. उसको she was also tried to be in the national movement, and she couldn't be beyond the point. I don't have to stop, I think, at some point, but I'll stop quickly. So, usko, now, she tried to be in the national movement, but her husband was a sarkari officer. So, pabandi lag gayi uski, she could not even go to the meetings and so on. So, she took 2 charkhas chalaye, and she had her own internal dynamics, and chup करके पैसे भेजती थी. सॉल्ट एजुकेशन के लिए उसने अपने जमाने में अपने बचत किचन के बचत में से 65 रुपए भेजे, जिसकी रिसीट है. अच्छा वो सो दिस ऑल सॉर्ट्स ऑफ स्टफ इन दैट. और मुझे आई थॉट ये बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है, इसकी बारे में फिल्म बननी चाहिए. आई ट्राई टू सेल इट टू माय यंग फ्रेंड्स, दे रिफ्यूज्ड. आई मीन दे सेड हाँ अच्छा, एंड दे डिडंट डू इट. फिर मैंने कहा मैं ही बना लेती हूँ, एंड आई बिकेम अ फिल्म मेकर इन दैट इत्तेफाकन सॉर्ट ऑफ वे. अब मैं पैसे की जरूरत थी, पर गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की फिल्म बनती हैं टू प्रमोट इंडियन कल्चर. वहां पे पता नहीं किसी ने मेरे को भेज दिया मैसेज. उस बंदे ने कहा ये हाउ दिस सेल इंडिया आउटसाइड, स्टोरी अबाउट एन ओल्ड वुमन हू डिड व्हाटएवर. मुझे आया गुस्सा. आई सेड डू यू थिंक दैट द नेशनल मूवमेंट वाज मेड अप ऑफ द नेहरूज एंड द गांधीज? It was made up of ordinary people, and this is my ordinary woman जो कोशिश करती है to be in the national movement and she can't be. So I became a filmmaker like that. The next film I made was her granddaughter film, which was on Kilmanmani, which was actually centered around Kilmanmani and the attack on the atrocities on the Dalit laborers in Kilmanmani. And then I went on to make another film. I'll just stop with one little account. So at some point, I am a creature of my times. I am very closely related to the young. चाहे उम्र में कहीं होगी, but my रिश्ता with boys and girls is there, is quite strong. So at some point I got into, and I had been lived through the emergency, so I started to make and I have been interested in the documentaries as an archive, not necessarily as the archival material, you know. So I started to, I had lived through the emergency, so I wanted to then make a film on women who went to jail for their political work. And that's what led me to, so I started doing some interviews. I found people who had gone at various times, and now that project has gone into many, many films. एक latest film है, but I want to end with saying कि अब जगह नहीं है दिखाने के लिए. Documentary film movement is dead. Space ही नहीं है. IIC and Habitat Center and so on in Delhi have a rule saying you have to get a censor certificate and a clearance from the police before you can show your documentary. So how can you show documentaries? So I will be now making films and keeping them in a dabba. Now in that situation, but there is it is also a vibrant time for cinema. I think Harish, you were there at that time, at that Chakravarti. So, you know, young persons has made this film on Chakravarti. So there is, and he managed to capture, fortunately for him, he managed to get IIC to screen it. I'm not sure, he may have a censor certificate, it's possible that he has a censor certificate. So this is the crisis that we are in. So, and the young are being put into jail. They've been put into jail for their political work, for their ideas, for their imagination. So we're all, I mean, everyone is sitting on the margins. कभी भी उठा करके तुमको डाला जा सकता है. So in that situation, making the films is now for me only an act of archiving, because कौन देखेगा उसको, I'm not sure, and that's the scene of the documentary cinema, and it was so vibrant at one time. I mean, we had made films on so critical, so whatever it is. आज भी, for instance, आनंद पटवारी का राम के नाम जो है वो और अब वो retrospectives में दिखाई जा रही है as a capturing of that moment. But it's very important because that is the more direct relationship with reality that you can portray. And it seems to me that is dying, and I have great regrets about it. I took you on some mad journey, but doesn't matter.